CBO, bipartisan.
Non-partisan. CBO is non-partisan.
Forgive me.
We work
one of the
for
most
both sides.
important agencies in Washington, and therefore a very easy target when lawmakers want to complain about the process. We'll get to that. What are you doing right now as an organization when you're waiting for these massive bills to drop? I mean, are you doing exercises? How do you get ready for what's about to happen?
No, very good. We're here to support the Congress. And as I said, we're nonpartisan.
Understood.
We work for both chambers and both sides, and we support both the Republicans, the majority, and the Democrats, the minority. Mm-hmm. We've been working with the Congress, with members, with committees for months as they prepare for this legislation. And we're working with both sides. It's Chairman Graham, of course, in the Senate, Chairman Arrington in the House, and we're supporting them. We're supporting their staff. And that's just routine. As the committees of jurisdiction refine their legislation, we're going back and forth with them to provide them with cost estimates and other information.
Well, you mentioned Chairman Arrington. Obviously, the budget resolution that he put forward that worked its way out of the Budget Committee called for $4.5 trillion in tax cuts that will be allowed. In return, you have to have at least $1.5 trillion of spending cuts. Keeping in mind that the president said last night that he doesn't want to see Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security touched. Is that mathematically possible?
For sure, it's mathematically possible.
Okay.
And it depends on the decisions to be made by the Congress in the future. At this point, where the Congress is now is that they're working on a concurrent resolution. Mm-hmm. This resolution is concurrent between the two chambers,
right,
the House and the Senate. There's no cost estimate of that. Where the cost estimate comes in is later in the process, after each chamber comes up with the specific legislation. And so that's, in some sense, we're working with them on a technical basis and confidentially when the eventual legislation comes forward, in whichever way it proceeds, with sort of the bigger or smaller, we will eventually provide a cost estimate that makes the numbers clear.
I want to get to an important debate that's underway right now in Washington, because we've had people sit at this table and argue that extending the Trump tax cuts will prompt growth that is unquantifiable. We get back to dynamic scoring and so forth as a concept there. Others are saying that it'll explode the deficit and ravage the economy. We get both extremes here a lot. You wrote at the end of last year, because higher taxes increase revenues. This is the idea of what would happen if they were allowed to expire. Because higher taxes increase revenues, the federal government borrows less, making more funds available for private investment. These two effects roughly offset each other. As a result, the expiration of the individual income tax provisions here does not significantly affect CBO's projections of real GDP. So does it inspire growth or not?
No, very good. And that's from a blog post on the CBO website.
Yes.
And the way to think of this is that the Tax Act in 2017 has a number of provisions. Many of them are permanent already. So there's international provisions that are largely permanent. There's corporate provisions, largely permanent. There's some business provisions that are not permanent. Expensing, the research credit, and then there's the personal side. And so the quote you read is exactly right. It's about the personal side. And as you said, the higher deficits that would result from extension of those leads to crowding out, has a downward effect on GDP growth. The positive incentives of lower taxes goes in the opposite direction. Those two cancel out. On the business side, so that's on the personal side.
Yes.
Then on the business side, those have a smaller cost in dollars, but probably a larger bang for the buck in terms of economic growth. And so to know the growth impact of the eventual legislation, we have to see it all, and that's what we're waiting on.
Well, and we're all waiting on it. We've been waiting, it feels like, for some time, and I'm sure that waiting game is going to have to last a little bit longer, knowing, and we've had multiple conversations with Chairman Jason Smith of the Ways and Means Committee about pursuing the tax cuts that Trump would like to see implemented, this notion that he needs more than $4.5 trillion, because that alone is what it will cost to extend the 2017 tax cuts. Can you walk us through the math on why that figure for extension is so much higher than the original score of the legislation from 8 years ago?
No, it's a great question. And, well, first of all, I should say our colleagues in the Joint Committee on Taxation eventually will provide the cost estimates for the cost. And so their numbers will appear in a CBO cost estimate, but by statute, they're JCT's numbers. So, broadly speaking, the 2017 Act, when it was enacted in December 2017, had a variety of lower taxes, but it also had base broadeners. Some of those were one-time. It changed the indexation of tax brackets. There's a one-time repatriation of foreign income that resulted in revenue, and another number of other provisions. And that's why the original cost of the 2017 Act on net was lower because of these one-off provisions. Now, of course, the cost of whatever is extended or whatever changes there are will again depend on the specifics. Are there one-off provisions? Are there other base broadeners? And what exactly is done?
So when you start talking about the process here, bring us behind the scenes just for a moment, because I picture stables of men and women wearing green visors going through rafts of legislation. I mean, just the amount of time required to read all of this is thousands of hours. How do you devour a reconciliation bill of that size?
Now I'm sorry, I'm smiling at the green visors. that is our self-image. So
so we're on brand here.
It's a positive here.
Good.
It's it's definitely a positive. It's what we do. We read the legislation line by line and word for word, and we work closely with congressional staff. And the committees are very helpful as they develop legislation.
Yeah.
We work back and forth. They provide us red lines.
So you're seeing this as it's being written, though. You don't get this one night and you all have to go home and,
exactly
each take a chapter.
Yeah, and of course, look, there's going to be changes over time. There could be changes at the last moment, and we support the Congress. Whatever processes that does it, that's how we do it. I can give you an example from 2021. So this is the reconciliation that happened then, Build Back Better. At the end of the process by which Build Back Better passed the House, it was never enacted, but it passed the House. There are a number of members of the House who had questions about the legislation, and we gathered a bunch of us at CBO together in a conference room. We were still wearing masks, and we'd all been vaccinated.
Yeah.
And we're on a conference call with dozens of members of Congress, and they're asking us questions. On page 72, line 7, you have this, the White House says that, what's the difference? And the right analyst from CBO, one of my colleagues, would get on the phone and the conference call and say, well, here's what it is, next member. And so that's the kind of in the weeds that we do if that's what members want.
This is the good stuff, Kaylee. This is literally how the sausage is made.
At some point during that meeting, we took, this is going to sounds crazy in 2025 thinking about it, but we took our masks off and we're all like, wow, this is weird.
That's what you look like.
And it's just like, we do what we need to do to accomplish the mission.
Well, I guess it's also a question of how your mission, having been completed, is actually received by some of the very same members that you're referring to. Obviously, you'll be well aware that the CBO has come under some criticism for the way in which it scores things. I mentioned the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, earlier. This was him during our last conversation about the way tariffs should be or should not be involved in all of this.
When you care about the fiscal health of the nation as a whole, you have to look at the possible influx of future revenues that could come from the president's trade proposals. An across the board 10% tariff, which the president did campaign on, an across-the-board tariff, that can bring in trillions of dollars. So those are things that you have to look at that can affect the fiscal health of the nation as a whole. But in the rules of reconciliation, CBO and joint tax will not allow those to be scored appropriately.
So he's talking about how tariffs fit into the fiscal health of the U.S. overall, but because of the rules of reconciliation, the CBO and joint tax will not allow it to be what he described as scored appropriately. Weigh in on the appropriateness of the way all of this comes together, because even the Treasury Secretary says you can't view these two things in isolation, taxes and tariffs.
Okay. No, and I agree with that. I agree with what Treasury Secretary Bessent said. It depends on how the tariffs are put in place. If they're put in place through administrative action, through the president using his authority, then it doesn't score in legislation. And so Chairman Smith, of course, is right about that. We can still provide information to the Congress. So we could provide a letter that says, says, here's what the president has done, here's our estimate of what the revenues would be, and here's the economic effects. And in some sense, it's going back to what we talked about just a moment ago. If we have revenue coming in that will reduce the amount of crowding out and boost GDP, and of course on the other side, the tariffs would reduce the efficiency of the economy, and that would go in the opposite direction with GDP.